many survivors in the room, but on stage we have Deependra Giri. Please come on stage now. Deependra Giri, Jennifer Kempton, and we were supposed to have Tutu Scott, as you saw in the announcement, but unfortunately she's not here today, and we don't know where she is because her phone doesn't answer. So hope she's okay and there is no problem. She lives in Washington, D.C., so it's surprising she's not here. She was very keen to speak today. As we have many survivors in the room, I have asked Evelyn Chambeau to step in and tell her story. Evelyn is a... well, she has obviously a lot of fans here. She has already spoken to Trust Women in London twice. She was trafficked when she was 9 years old in Cameroon. She was sold from Cameroon to a family in Maryland in the US, where she has been a domestic slave for years before she could escape. So Evelyn stepped in to replace Tutu. Thank you, Evelyn. All their stories underline the cruelty of slavery and the need to provide those who have come out of hell with the support they need, and to make sure that they can heal, rebuild the trust that they have totally lost in human beings, and take back control of their lives, which is always very difficult. Deependra, Jennifer, and Evelyn have agreed to share with us their very personal stories, and we are incredibly grateful to them. And Deependra was also at the conference in 2013 because he is a Nepalese. He has been trafficked to Qatar as a slave, and of course he thought he would have a fantastic job as a clerk in Qatar. And he has been brave enough, after almost 3 years in slavery in Qatar, to come back last summer to take documentation of what is going on in Qatar. So his testimony will be particularly interesting. They will be joined on the panel by Kevin Gutfleish, who is of the FBI and who has extensive knowledge of violence against children and digital crime. We will see with him how the authorities fight child exploitation and in particular sexual online exploitation, which is a fast-growing crime with children, again, always younger, and you know, it's horrible. Moderating the panel is Martina Vandenberg, a lawyer who is the founder and the president of the Human Trafficking Pro Bono Legal Center. Please all come in and sit down. This is the leading US institution aimed at supporting the victims of human trafficking through access to justice. What Martina does is make sure that victims that have worked for years for free get financial compensation. So for that, she has received a lot of awards, and she's a great friend of Trust Women. She has been there since the start, since the first one, and she has taught me so many things about human trafficking. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Monique, and thanks all of you for being here today. As many of you, because there are so many experts on trafficking who are in the audience today, as many of you already know, the human trafficking movement in the United States and around the world is becoming much, much more survivor-led. And what we have today is a panel of remarkable survivor leaders, and then two of us who do our best to support them. We are extremely fortunate today. You've already heard a little bit about each of their stories. I just want to add, because you don't have her biography in your materials, that Evelyn Chambeau, as you know, needs no introduction. She was actually appointed by President Obama to the National Advisory Council of Survivors to the White House. And so Evelyn is a recognized national leader as well. So I share that with you only because it's not in your materials. To put this in context of why survivor leadership is so important, if you look at the State Department's own statistics, data published in the Trafficking in Persons report in 2014, what we find out is that although Monique has told us that there are as many as 21 million people held in forced labor and all forms of servitude all around the world, in 2014 there were only 10,051 prosecutions in the entire world. And of those, only 418 were for forced labor. On this panel alone, we have 2 survivors of forced labor. So I want to stop with that just little piece of context and turn to our really remarkable panelists and ask all of you, first just to introduce yourselves, but then also to share with the audience how it is that you came to the trafficking field and to the leadership that you've shown. Evelyn, may I start with you?
Yes, you may. You sure do. Can I go longer, Monique? Because you know me, I love to talk. I'm just saying.
You have 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. I'll work on it. So again, thank you. I'm honored to be here. And as a fan of Trust Women, I had to do this. My name is Evelyn Chumbo. I am a survivor activist for anti-human trafficking. So again, most of you probably know me and most of you don't. I was trafficked from the age of 9 until 17. And the promise was to get a good education. Again, I just wanted to marry Will Smith. And I wanted Bill Cosby to be my dad. So, but that didn't happen. That American dream was completely gone. So it wasn't like the Cosby or the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air or 90210. Instead, I became a domestic servitude in a house, taking care of two children, cleaning and cooking, and no schooling from age 9 until 17. And, you know, being abused every day, mentally, physically. And thanks to a lot of great people, I got help. You know, I am now an advocate around the world and here in the U.S. So I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So Jennifer, could you sort of tell everyone a little bit about yourself and the amazing work that you've done with Survivors, Inc.?
Absolutely. Like you, Evelyn, I too love to talk, so this could be interesting. I grew up in an abusive, dysfunctional family and was sexually assaulted at my virginity at a very young age. It led me with a lot of vulnerabilities, and I ended up having some domestic violence relationships, which led me to my knight in shining armor, my Prince Charming. And I was then groomed into a life that I never knew existed at that point through fraud, manipulation, coercion, emotional fulfillment, as well as a drug addiction as well that was used to lure me in into this relationship and grooming process. It then changed the dynamics of things when another female and my original trafficker approached me and got me tied into debt bondage, more manipulation, coercion, fraud. That led me into a life of being sexually exploited. At the age of 25 years old, there was a lot of things that tied into my story, including delivering my own child on the streets. I was kidnapped by a fellow trafficker, held hostage. I was raped with a butcher knife, one of the many assaults that took place, beat, threatened violently. I was terrified. However, you know, I had a life-changing, pivotal moment after that rape with a butcher knife, and was able to escape that life of enslavement. I realized that Prince Charming was my captor after he sold me to a gang. And after my escape, I started to rebuild my life, which is a very hard, difficult struggle. And I was really caught up because I was still psychologically enslaved. See, each time that I was traded off from my original trafficker to the gangs, what have you, I was branded. I was marked as cattle, as property, and of who my owner was and who I belonged to. And so I earned enough money for my first cover-up and realized what my purpose was during one of those cover-ups, and that was to pay forward the freedom, mercy, and grace that had been given to me and helping other survivors of human trafficking that had been branded or scarred with violence reclaim their bodies through removing or covering their brandings. So I started Survivors, Inc. in order to do that. We also raise awareness, create advocacy, resource connection for survivors to help them in their journey. We are survivor-led. Most of our volunteers are survivors. And it's just really amazing to be a part of, this fight against trafficking. I feel it's my duty to be here, to share my story, so that the public can understand what happened and help stand with us to put a stop to modern-day slavery.
Wow, thank you. And Deependra, I want to turn to you and ask you to provide some background and an introduction of yourself. But before you do that, I want to say that Deependra and I have been friends now for about 5 years. And the very first time that Deependra appeared on a panel, it was with his back to the audience, with no cameras in the room, because it was still too dangerous for his face to be seen. And now he runs an NGO, the Safety First Foundation, and is a remarkable and resilient survivor of forced labor. So Deependra, please.
Thank you, everyone. Well, thank you, Monique, and thank you, Martina, ma'am, and thank you, everyone, for being here. And it's a great honor that I'm invited, and I would also like to thank the entire team of Thomson Reuters. And before I start, I would like to apologize because I'm not a native English speaker, and so I know that I'm going to make a lot of mistakes when I'm speaking, and so please forgive me for that. So my name is Deependra Giri, and I have been trafficked and worked as forced labor in Qatar for many years in deplorable condition as a modern-day slave. And later, when Monique came in touch with me and I was invited for Trust Women Conference in 2013 and 14, and she and few of her friends, they helped me, and so I was able to establish an NGO called the Safety First Foundation, and we established that in 2014, and from that time we are moving in a very slow speed, trying to help people human trafficking and modern slavery, so that we can, as we know that we cannot stop people going to the Gulf to work, but at least we can give them proper counseling and aware them like what are the things that they should keep in mind when they are going for the Gulf migration. So they should have the emergency contact numbers of the human rights in Qatar, the embassy of Nepal in Qatar, and the labor court, and all these things. So, when I went to Qatar in 2008, I had a dream that I will go there and I will have a decent job and a good salary so that I can help my family financially. But at the same time, I was aware that it's not easy as I'm thinking about that, dreaming of that. So when I went to Qatar, as soon as I went out of the airport, my passport was taken away, and I was like, what is this going to happen with me? The guy who took away my passport, I didn't know who is that person. So he took me to the industrial area, the labor camp, and it was midnight, and this accommodation of the laborers was more looking like go down, and so he arranged me a bed. He asked me that you sleep now, and you must be feeling tired, and tomorrow in the morning we will take you to the office, and we will talk about that. So when I was in Nepal, I was promised that I will be working as a clerk in an office. But the next day when I reached the office, I met one of the operation manager of the company, and he said that, okay, Deependra, so you are here to work in the go down, and you have to work you have to lift heavy things, you have to keep it from here to there, and you have to carry, load and unload, all these kind of things. And so then I was very scared, because the first thing, they took away my passport. I didn't know who took away my passport. I was searching that face in the office, but I didn't see that guy in the office who took away my passport. And second thing, I was promised that I will be working as a clerk. But there, this operation manager, he told me that I have to work as a labor to lift heavy things, which I was not mentally or physically prepared for. But one thing I made up my mind that I have traveled a long way. My family is far away from here. I cannot do anything. There is no one where I didn't know anything whom to go and just seek help with, you know. So I made up my mind that in any condition I am going to work here, and as I had signed a contract that says that I cannot leave the country without completing 2 years. And due to the kafala system in Qatar, the sponsorship, you cannot leave that job if you don't like that. You have to complete the contract. And before, if by chance I get my passport, I cannot leave the country, because then I need my sponsor to sign an exit permit. And when I get that exit permit, I can, at the immigration, when I hand over the exit permit, and then only I can leave the country. So I was very scared and afraid. And I started working there, and after few months, only I got a chance. The manager, he came, he was out of country, and he came back and he said, I was invited to his cabin, and he asked me like, Deependra, we gave you a work visa to work as a clerk, and why are you working in the godown? And I said that in your absence, the operation manager, he told me that you have to work as a labor to load and unload the heavy things. And so I was working there, and I don't know what to do and what not to do. And so he asked me a few questions, and later he asked me to work in the office as a clerk. But this was not that I ended up with a good time. After that, when back at in our labor camps, in the our accommodation, there was no electricity, there was no drinking water, and we have to sleep on the rooftop. On the rooftop, many of you may know like what is the temperature in Qatar. It's like more than 50 degrees, and we have to sleep on the rooftop. And our accommodation was surrounded by cement factories. And when we wake up in the morning, we were like, we are coming out of a beauty salon, you know, all like doing a lot of makeup, you know. And so when we complained about that, even I was scolded by the manager that you have to work, and we are trying to fix your problems. And there were a lot of problems, you know. And when my passport was taken away, and after a few months when I met Andrew Gardner, I came to know this word modern day slave. The day when my passport was taken away, from that day I was a modern slave.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second and ask you a question? Because one of the really important things that Jennifer just mentioned was the role of debt bondage. And you had mentioned as well that you had a debt when you were in Qatar.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's migrating to Gulf countries or anywhere for a job and all these things. It's expensive It's expensive in Nepal, you know, because you have to pay a huge amount of money to the recruiter and to the recruiting agency, to the brokers, and you have to pay for your tickets, and then you have to travel to, and only you can travel to the Gulf countries, you know. And so for that, I have to arrange like $2,000 US or $3,000 US to pay to the recruiting agencies or to the brokers, you know, because they for the visa, though the visa and the ticket is free, but they charge you. And last year when I was in Qatar, I came to know that some of the big companies, the giant companies in Qatar, the HR managers of these companies who are directly or indirectly very close to the company owners, they negotiate with the recruiting agencies in Nepal that I have 100 visa. Let's suppose I have 100 visa for laborers, and so how much you are going to pay me per head, and so that I can give you the...
In a kind of kickback.
Yeah.
It's a kickback.
Yeah. And so when so they negotiate and they come to a figure that okay, I can pay you $500 per head, and so that is to be paid by later on. In the beginning, that is paid by the recruiter, but later on they just charge that with the people.
So in the end, the worker pays that.
Yeah. And so like me, and it's very expensive when everything is counted, and it's very expensive for us to pay that, And so I don't have that much money, and so I have to take loan from a person I know, and it's very hard to get a loan from the bank on the keeping your agreement or your visa as a collateral, So when I take a loan with some individual person, and in that case, it's the interest rates are very huge, and the salary in the Gulf countries are very less, and so it's very hard to survive. You have to send money every month to home, and at the same time you have to send the money to the money I have taken with, and so I have to pay the interest at the same time, and I have to look after my family, I have to take care of myself, and the things go very things are very hard when you are not paid every month. So I was getting paid after every 3 months.
So I'm going to stop you right there, because we're going to come back to each one of you, and I'm going to ask you what life has been like since escaping, and what it is sort of after you escaped your situation, and how you managed to get out of debt. But before we do that, I want to turn to Kevin Gutfleish to ask you. It's interesting, we've heard real similarities between sex trafficking and labor trafficking in terms of the mechanisms of control that traffickers use. One of the things that we heard on the last panel is that, in labor and in sex trafficking, there's a use of technology. I know you're focusing in the intelligence unit at the FBI on the use of technology in child sex trafficking in the United States. So can you talk to us a little bit about, what successes the FBI has had in unraveling these schemes to traffic children in the United States?
Thank you.
Please, thank you.
Monique, thank you for having me. It's truly an honor to be here and share the stage with each of you. And as you mentioned, I'm here on behalf of the FBI representing the Violent Crimes Against Children section. Please know that there's a whole entire section back at FBI headquarters that works hard every day to investigate and assist the prosecutors to understand these crimes and to bring the perpetrators to justice and to get victims the help that they need. So I'm here on behalf of Crimes Against Children program, and the FBI has a separate human trafficking program that would handle the labor and indentured servitude aspects of those federal crimes, and the sex trafficking of minors is the area I focus on. And so I think that in terms of area of success, one thing that comes to mind is this past October, the FBI had a 4-day operation called Operation Cross Country. And this was the 10th time that we've done Operation Cross Country. Now, keep in mind that days all across the United States, every single evening we have our task force officers and FBI agents and analysts working sex trafficking. It's nonstop all day, every day. So operations are happening continually. But with Operation Cross Country, we focus on 4 days that we have each of our FBI offices participate so that we can get a national sense of the scope of the crime problem. And so for 4 different days all in a row, we had each of our offices participate. More than 400 agencies partnered with the FBI to assist us. And I'm pleased to say that we had 82 minor victims that were recovered of sex trafficking, as well as 239 traffickers and their accomplices. So those are good numbers, but I think that's indicative of the crime problem as well. And there's no reason to think that if we didn't replicate that on any other 4-day period that we would have different results, unfortunately.
So I think the hope for all of us is that the children who were identified in those raids had support and services afterwards. And so are the children referred to services after?
They are. In addition to the investigators and the analysts at work, we also have victim specialists assigned to each of our FBI field offices, and they are right there with us during the operations, and they make direct contact with the victims and their families, and their primary role is to ensure the well-being of those children that we encounter, and so they immediately work to get them services. They are regionally based in each of our field offices, so they know what services are available and can make those referrals very quickly.
So I think this is a really good sort of pivot point to talk to each of you about sort of what happened after you got out, after you escaped. And so, Evelyn, could you talk a little bit about how you managed to get away, and then what the post-trafficking situation that Denise Brennan has written about so brilliantly, what the post-trafficking situation was and the challenges you faced immediately after escaping?
Thank you. You only giving me 5 minutes.
No, I'll give you more. You can have more this time.
Okay. It's first I want to say it's really funny because looking back at my situation, and one of the person that was like the heart of my situation is actually here, you know, Melanie Onhart, and
your lawyer.
My lawyer. So she was in the beginning of everything. So and I owe her a lot of gratitude. So post-trauma, and especially with our current situation, I hate this term illegal immigrants. I really do. Because when you talk about illegal immigrants, especially when it comes to children, you have to wonder how the children got here. Mm-hmm. So I'm an example of an illegal immigrant, an undocumented child. I came here illegally, which I did not know. I did not know. I did not know that I need a green card to be here. I did not know that you need a working permit to be here. Again, I came here at the age of 9 for a promise to get a better education, and then when I came here, that was not the promise I got. You know, I end up cooking and cleaning, taking care of kids, being abused physically and mentally, and one of my punishment, I had to take off my clothes and get beaten. One of my punishment, again, I had to stand up from like 10 p.m. to like 5 a.m. in the morning. You know, and no school, no education, no contact with my family members. And, you know, afterward, you know, I decided, you know, I ran away. I was trafficked twice, one by my trafficker and one by a family member. So I ran away, went to a church, went and told my story to a church, and from there, everything was happening. Law enforcement and FBI were right there, which we're working on it, but thank you. They were right there and, you know, asking a lot of questions, you know, especially for someone that did not know that need green card to work in a country. Like, oh, you're lying, you're telling your story because you just want papers. And first of all, I did not, like, again, we don't know any of that. We just want to see Will Smith. So, you know, from there, magic happened. I got into foster care. I'm really grateful. You know, my story got prosecuted until they went all the way to Cameroon. You got investigated, you know, talk about it. But it was like, what happened after? You get the green card, you get the working permit, what's left? Then I'm placed into foster care, which is another issue. But because I had somebody there that was always helping me, but it was really hard because life in foster care was another story of its own. And again, I couldn't do a lot of things like other kids that were Americans because I still didn't have my document. It was like a field trip to go to Canada. I couldn't go because I didn't have a passport, which you know, so it really pisses me off most of the time when they talk about illegal immigrants and undocumented kids because most of us are trafficked here to this country. And we were not asked to be brought here. And we just walk around trying to figure out life. But I'm one of those undocumented kids that went by the rules. I pay my taxes. I graduated. You know, it took a while.
With a degree in Homeland Security.
You know, I'm working at one of the greatest law firms ever, Baker McKenzie, and, you know, I'm also a voice to help this issue to make sure it doesn't happen again, you know, and it's just really, there's a lot of work to do afterward, long term, you know, as far as like, they talk about bondage. We are locked in the house, we have no issue of the ISA world. We don't even know about our taxes or how to get a job or how to get a lot of things. You know, a lot of the time, most organizations focus on rescuing us. And first of all, we should stop saying rescue. Most of the time, they work about rescue, but what happened next? Now, people know about modern slavery, but now you got to think of post. What happened next? What's going after? Making sure we get our compensation like Martina is doing. Yes. So, but, you know, there's just so much to do afterward. And we're grateful that you want to help us, but let's talk about what happened next.
Thank you, Evelyn. So, Jennifer, when we talked on the phone, you and Tutu, who sadly couldn't be here today, you and Tutu talked a lot about sort of what happens after and what happens next. So can you talk a little bit about how you managed to escape and then how you created this organization?
Absolutely. My escape was only an act of mercy from my creator. After that 2.5-hour brutal rape with a butcher knife, I found myself at the end of a rope, literally tied around my neck twice, hanging, feeling the misery, the addiction, the enslavement, the trauma, all leaving out the bottoms of my feet. And that feeling got to my knees, and I hit the floor, and I was really angry. You know, I couldn't even die to be put out of my misery. And yet a voice came out of nowhere and said, I have a purpose for you, and it's not to die in the basement of a crack house. Thankfully, I did discover what that purpose was, is helping my fellow brothers and sisters by using my story to raise money, raise awareness in order to help them in their journeys. Going off of, you know, Evelyn, yes, once we escape, I mean, that's a whole new hell. It's not easy, you know. You can rescue us all you want. That's not what we need. We need opportunity. We need opportunities not just for counseling, and we don't want your pity. We don't want your sensationalized story seeking coming our way. We want jobs. We want education. We want choices. We want our children back. I know some of my post issues, you know, I have $20,000 worth of child support debt that's owed because I was enslaved. I can't get a passport. I can't leave this country. You know, there needs to be more startup money for survivors who want to start their own businesses. You know, I had to invest. I'm in current debt right now because I started an LLC on top of the nonprofit. You know, I had to have money in order to get that going. I know that funding is huge. I have to work tirelessly to try to make sure that our nonprofit, me and the small group of volunteers that we have doing fundraising, you know, we're working tirelessly to make sure that these applications that we have around the world of survivors needing services are able to be fulfilled. But some of these bigger NGOs are getting it and only putting 12 cents the dollar towards direct services. That's not okay. That's not okay. We need more direct services. We need more resources. We need more opportunity. We need more choice.
Thank you very much. So, Deependra, can you talk a little bit about how you managed to escape and what the challenges were after you managed to get away?
Well, I knew that I had signed one agreement, a work agreement, that I can go back home after completing my work contract of 2 years. But I knew it is not going to be so easy, and it was what I thought, like after completing 2 years, when I requested my manager that, okay, I have completed my 2 years agreement, and so I want to go back home to see my family. Because when I first went to Qatar, I left behind my wife and my newly born baby girl. She was of only 1 month, and my mom and dad. And so my manager told me that we cannot let you go now, because if you are gone back home, then who is going to look after your work in the office? And so you have to arrange someone in your absence who is going to take care of the job you are doing right now. And I said, I knew many of my friends, they were desperate to get job in the Gulf countries, because in Nepal, unemployment is one of the biggest problem and challenges. So, but I don't wanted to put my friends into that problem, which I was facing. So I told my manager that, well, I don't know anyone whom I can bring here for in my absence, who is going to take care of the charges and work here. But what I can do is, instead of going for 2 or 3 months vacation, just allow me 2 weeks vacation. And I already mentally made up my mind that if I get a chance to go back home, I am never going to come back in the same hell. And so he said, no, you have to arrange someone, and otherwise we cannot let you go. I said, no, I cannot arrange anyone, because I don't know anyone who can come and do this job. And so I talked to my general manager, and then he was like, I was able to convince him, and then he helped me he said that, okay, let Deependra go back for 2 weeks, and in one condition, one situation, that the company is going to hold my 3 months salary, that they will pay me when I'm back from Nepal. And just imagine, when I don't have a single penny in my pocket, I'm just trying to go back home, because me and my family was like going through very tough situation financially, and on top of that, I was mentally tortured. I never said, whenever I talk to my family, I never said that I'm living in such a situation, because I don't wanted them to be panic, you know. And even if I say them, then they are helpless, you know. So they didn't give me my salary, and then I was lucky that they said that we will pay you 3 months salary and your ticket money when you come back after 2 weeks. And so I took help, financial help with my friends. They just helped me to buy my tickets. And so I went, and then I asked my manager that, okay, can you give me my exit permit, because without that, the immigration is not let me go. And so they said, okay, we will give your exit permit. And I could not sleep the whole night, because next day early morning I had to go to the airport, and I don't have my exit permit in my hand. Next day morning I was at the airport. Still I am very much confused, I am traumatized that I don't have the exit permit, and how can I go? And one guy came in the morning, he gave me a call, and he said, where are you? I just met him. He gave me my exit permit. I was so happy, and I said, oh my God, this is, it's worth than my 3 months salary, that I got this. It's the key to my home, you know. And so I went back home. When I reached home, the first thing, I hugged my mom. I started crying. That I was free from sorry. So after 2 weeks, my manager, he gave me a call that, Deependra, okay, we want to book your tickets, and tell me the date when you are coming back. I said, I'm sorry to say that, and I'm sorry to say, and at the same time, I'm very glad to tell you that I'm not going to come back. And my manager asked me, okay, then what about your salary? I said, oh, that is like a bonus from me to you. And so I don't want that money. Still I had some, debt, and that was, I was lucky that, thank you and Monique and her friend, you guys helped me in 2013 to pay back my all the debts. You and Monique and your friend. So, yeah. And you guys helped me for that, and thank you so much. And you guys helped me also to set up this NGO and work to fight against the slavery and human trafficking. And so now the challenges are much more, and we have more responsibilities now, because when I was in Qatar, it was only I was only having the problem, but now we have to take care of other people, and we have to try our best that no one is going to face such kind of problems, you know. And so now we have challenges that we are moving very slowly, and we have to do a lot of things, and for that we need financial supports. As she told, that the big NGOs and other things, they get the financial and the funds from all over the world, but like we are very small, we are nowhere in the world, you know, and so nobody trusts us when we are trying our best we are trying from our side, we are trying best to make this place a better world to live for everyone. And we are thinking like how we can stop these problems when government is closing its eyes and they are just sitting blindly and they are deaf and dumb, you know. So it's like we need, so now we are planning to set up a workshop where we can provide free of cost what the expertise they have, like if they are interested to do some farming jobs, and then we can train them free of cost. And if someone wants to do a plumbing job, we can train them for the plumbing or carpentry or all these things, you know. And I come from a family where my father is a farmer, you know, and a village where I was born, it's very remote, and you know, people are not educated because it's lack of money, poverty, and all these things. So we are slowly we are trying to try to find out people or the organizations where we can tie up and we can work with them.
So Deependra, what you have accomplished on your own is really remarkable. It's really incredible. One thing that I heard from all three of you is that you're really focusing on attention and then also the post-trafficking situation. So I want to ask each one of you what can be done to prevent trafficking? And Kevin, I also want to ask you this question. So what can be done as a preventative measure? Evelyn, what do you think?
For me, the number one prevention is to help survivors get jobs. Mm-hmm. You know, giving them job opportunity and giving them a choice to know what they want to do. And
can you talk about your initiative on that?
Yes, please. Thank you. So for me, I just feel like providing job for survivors will help them to be able, not to be able to go back to the situation that they were in, or will prevent them from being trafficked, especially when they're coming from another country. If they are able to have a job in their country, they will not decide to go to Europe or America. You know, because most of them go to those countries to look for employment and end up being trafficked without knowing, or most of them get trafficked by, work visas like the HB, but I just feel that having jobs will really help prevent survivors from, will really help prevent human trafficking. Long term, because if I have a job, I'm making good money, paying my bills on time, my cell phone, my child is being taken care of, I will not want to go to another country, or I will not want to keep going back to the organization that helped me. Because most of those organizations that are there, they help us, but it's really not long term. They help us as far as like if we're foreigners to get documents, or they're like, okay, you want to go do a training for like CNA or something, but we have to fight for that on our own, but they don't really provide a lot of like, hey, we'll make sure you get this job and you stay there, and this is the money that you'll be making enough. Because if I've been working cleaning house for such a long time, and I go back, I don't want to go back to the job that I was trafficked doing. I don't want to go back doing that. And then I also want to make enough money to take care of my family that I would not even think of coming to America to get that.
But Evelyn, you've gone back to Cameroon and you've done training in Cameroon. So what's been the response to your prevention efforts in Cameroon?
So I partner up with a lady, Katie Ford, and another woman called Sister Malongo. She's from Cameroon. She's actually here in the audience. So there were a bunch of girls that were trafficked from Cameroon to Kuwait. And so they were, Katie Ford helped rescue some of those girls back to Cameroon. But the problem is now they're in Cameroon. The reason they went to Kuwait was to get a job. But they ended up being trafficked. But now they're back in Cameroon, and their family don't want anything to do with them, and they don't have job opportunity, and some of them have even health issues. So we travel to Cameroon to kind of help them start up like a business, to give them an idea. Say, hey, what kind of business do you want to do? Is it whatever business you want to do, we are going to help you get that business. That way you don't even have to think about leaving Cameroon. So we're working on that, but again, like most of my colleagues says right here, it's funding. Funding is a big issue. I know there's a lot of organizations that get funding in rescuing, but we need funding for training. So that's the initiative that I'm doing. And also, I don't know, most of you heard, but in 2015, Monique, Trust Women launched the action, and that action was to help create jobs, and we're still working on it to help survivors get jobs in the corporate world. So we have a program called Walk Through Walls. Like I said, when I first came to Trust Women, we don't need your compassion. We don't need your pity. We need job. We need employment, because I'm sorry, I'm working now. It feels good to pay my bills on time. So I want other survivors to have that same opportunity. They need that same opportunity, because you can't keep saying, oh no, we're going to help you, or you want us to come speak, and you don't pay us. I'm sorry. We are as much as important as the next consultant. Our stories are important because we're teaching you. From my stories, you're learning. Like I learned in the law from that's called intellectual property. So I'm giving you... So I am teaching you, we go and we train FBIs, we train law enforcement, on how to help prevent this issue. So why don't you pay us? Because when I leave my work to come speak, that's me taking off. And I heard that's PTO. I don't want to use my PTO on that.
So let me just say that Evelyn is on our advisory committee, and Evelyn teaches us every day at the Human Trafficking Pro Bono Legal Center. And for the record, we pay Evelyn.
She does pay me. She makes sure she does pay me. I'm on a lot on Advisory Council. Again, we want to help you. I'm on Free the Slave Advisory Council. I assist my colleague Tina Front, Courtney's house. I'm on the White House Advisory Council, but we're not going to talk about that. We're going to donate our own cookies. That's fine. But again, you don't pay us. You don't really, we really have to straighten this. We need to get paid for our time.
So I think the bottom line is that trafficking survivors need to be treated as professionals and
yes.
treated as colleagues.
Yes.
So I have a question for Jennifer. Can you talk about this prevention issue? And you mentioned in your early remarks a little bit about addiction as well. So can you also talk a bit, if you're comfortable, about the role of addiction in trafficking in the United States and how that fits into the prevention question?
Absolutely, and I'll address that issue first. Addiction is a hugely used manipulation tactic of traffickers by using a pre-existing addiction to, or getting the victim to, drugs in order to use the supply of drugs as leverage to coerce them into exploitation, or to, so to speak, dangle the drugs in front of them to keep them going and putting money in the trafficker's pocket. With that being said, I second everything you said, of course. I want to piggyback, though, off of that a little bit and say that, with the employment issue, yes, we need jobs, but we also need legislature to back us up in our efforts. Just for me personally, I can run an international grassroots nonprofit. I can start an LLC. I can, fist and knuckle through life and try to survive, which is a daily occurrence. It's not a one-time event. Survival is not you're done. No, it's a daily feat. And I'm in the middle of that personal feat, but I can't go into McDonald's and get a job working the register because I have a theft from stealing 2 pairs of underwear from Sears because my trafficker wouldn't supply them. Little things that all tie into these big issues, the employment. I think prevention is a huge topic. I don't even know that I can say the top thing. I know that the public having their eyes open to the fact that this is your problem too. I am somebody's child. I am somebody's sister. I have a child. Every one of these survivors has family and people that love and care about them. You can't keep acting like this isn't happening. And the more you're aware, the more you can do to help the issue. That's going to prevent some things. I know that I too have trained with Homeland Security to help law enforcement officers. That survivor-informed training to help you guys know what to do when you do intercede in a situation. Instead of criminalizing that victim, being able to look at them with compassion and offer them real help. That recidivism rate is extremely high. So we need to have that long-term sustainability and help and support for all survivors, not just the escape or rescue phase, as so many people like to put it. I started my LLC because we're in the middle of revamping and relaunching our nonprofit, Survivors Inc., in order to do some bigger, grander things for those that we serve. Like I said, we now do our debrandings and cover-ups internationally. But I created this LLC because I've taken on advocacy and education. Education is key, and I love to be able to go into schools, educating with law enforcement, social workers, the basic public is great, but to go into these schools and teach these young children the red flags, the victim identification, the manipulation tactics of traffickers, giving them a crash course, a basic human trafficking 101 on what force is, what fraud is, and what coercion is, and how cunning and baffling ways they can be used against you to enslave you. And then telling them my story in depth, the raw, real vulnerability of my addiction and my pre-existing vulnerabilities before I got pulled in, identifying with them. It opens their eyes to seeing how close to home this really is. And there's always handfuls of students that say, this is happening to me or my mom or my little brother. And so we have to look beyond the textbook with our children and teach them real life experiences. You're not protecting them by shielding them from this problem. You're not protecting the problem by shielding your own eyes. You're aiding the problem. So yeah, prevention, and it's not, I don't think that we're going to see anything in our generation. We're not. It's up to us now to spark a fire in the younger generation and so on and so forth, so that instead of these numbers constantly rising every day as they do, because I don't know how many minutes we've sat here, but every 30 seconds somebody else goes into the life of human trafficking. Instead of those numbers continuing to rise, the more we educate, open our eyes, and get active and get involved, then those numbers maybe, just maybe, will start to go down.
Thank you. So Deependra, you've really turned your work now to prevention, and not prevention of people from migrating, not preventing people from leaving Nepal, but safe migration. So can you talk about what you're doing now to prevent trafficking? And it would be great if you could also address the issue of corruption.
Well, we cannot stop people from Nepal to migrate, because for that we have to create jobs. And like there are few giant companies like Jara, they have a manufacturing unit in Bangladesh, So I would like to request these like giant companies like Nike and Adidas and all these companies and Jara. So why don't they come if they have manufacturing unit in Bangladesh? Why don't they have in Nepal? They can have Nepal. Yeah. They can have in Nepal.
As long as they don't violate rights in Nepal.
Yeah. And so they can come and we can work together. We can have a workshop, I said. And so as per like Jara, what they want, what kind of staff they want for their manufacturing unit, we can train them under the supervision of these multinational companies, and they can come and they can hire people from Nepal, And we need to provide skill-based training to people after they complete their graduation, because there is no job in Nepal. And
But there are even additional barriers. You were telling me about some of the barriers to getting jobs. Even after you're trained, sometimes you have to pay.
yeah, so in Nepal, I'm giving you an example of my wife. So there was a government job vacancy for agricultural bank, and so she was preparing for that, and so she appeared for the exam, and she after the exam was over, and she was waiting for the results, and so I went to one of the officer. And I asked him, like, what about the result? Is my wife selected or not, appointed or not? And so he directly said that, okay, Deependra, just pay me $5,000 US, and the job is yours. And I said, how can I pay you $5,000 US when I don't have money? And my wife is applying for a job so that she can earn money every month, so she can look after, she can be independent, So these are the problems, When I was going to register my NGO, I met a lot of high rank officers who were asking me to pay them bribe, So they think that when I'm going to register an NGO, it means that I have a tree in my home that have dollars, So that produce dollars, And so, and I told them that I'm not going to register an NGO that I'm going to earn dollars, but I'm going to aware people, I'm going to give them proper counseling for the safe migration when they are going to the Gulf states. And when you have to go, when there's a process for going to the Gulf countries, you have to get this work sticker from the Ministry of Labor, and you have to go for the orientation class. And so people, they don't go for the orientation class because these classes are conducted in Kathmandu city, and people from Kathmandu, mostly the Kathmandu people living in Kathmandu, they don't go for Gulf migration. People from the villages, remote areas, they go for the Gulf migration, and it's very expensive to travel from the village to the Kathmandu, and the things are not so easy that it's not that you just go and get this employment sticker in a day or in an hour. You have to go for orientation class for 3 days, and staying in a hotel, the cheapest hotel in Kathmandu will cost you $20 to $25 a day, and that is only the cost of the room. You pay for the food, that is different. So if anyone is applying for a job for the Gulf, then he has to spend time, like at least a week in Kathmandu, and for that he has to have money of extra $100, and that is not possible for everyone. And for that, people, they just seek help, financial help from others. They take debts, So there are a lot of problems. Everything is centralized in Kathmandu. So when we have to travel to we have to migrate to the Gulf, we have to come to Kathmandu to get the flight. You have to go for the get the sticker on your passport from the Ministry of Labor. You have to be in Kathmandu, and that will take you at least 2 days if you are not taking the help of the brokers.
Yeah.
It will cost you around 2,000 or 3,000 rupees to get that sticker, and with your efforts you cannot get that. So you have to take up help of the brokers, and brokers will charge you extra 2,000 rupees. For the orientation class of safe migration, you have to take orientation class of 3 days, at least 3 days, and for that you have to pay like 2,000, 2,500 rupees.
So it sounds, Deependra, like people are skimming off money at every single layer of this onion. Everyone's making a profit.
Lot of profit.
Except the workers.
Except the workers.
Right?
Yeah.
So how much was the interest, Deependra?
Oh, it's like 60%. It's a huge amount, and if you guys didn't help me, I was not able to pay back my loan, I would have never paid back my loan.
So I want people to start lining up for questions in front of the microphones. There's microphones on each aisle, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions. But before we move to questions, Kevin, I want to ask you this question of prevention, but I also want to pivot off a point that Jennifer made about prosecution of trafficking victims for crimes. So first, what is the FBI doing to sort of prevent? Cyrus Vance talked about his office's efforts to prevent. What is the FBI doing to prevent trafficking? But then also, what is the FBI and federal law enforcement doing to prevent arrest of trafficking victims?
It's a challenge. I agree, Jennifer, it has to be victim-centric. We have community outreach specialists in each of our FBI field offices who are working with the community. I think we have to continue to raise awareness. It's a difficult topic. People don't want to talk about sex. People don't want to talk about sex with minors. And you put those two together and people are not comfortable. As law enforcement, we have to continue to work together and learn from one another. The bad guys are learning from each other every day. We heard that one call from jail from one criminal to another, making recommendations about what particular apps to use on one's phone. The bad guys are working together, law enforcement, the NGOs here, we all have to continue to work together to understand what is effective, what are the investigative techniques that are the most effective. If there are instances where we see less recidivism than others, let's learn about that, see what are they doing in those locations that maybe could be replicated in other parts of the country. And we have to use that national network in order to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Jennifer, please.
I have a question. Are you using survivor-informed trainings, survivor-led trainings to train your officers? Because you can tell me all you want about what I or my survivors, sisters and brothers need, but if it's not coming from the mouths of those it's happened to, your officers are never going to get a full understanding of what to do or how to help, nor have that fire in their heart to want to do so.
We do. We have our sex trafficking courses that we put on for the FBI, and our task force officers do include survivors of sex trafficking as part of that curriculum.
Thank you. And what about labor?
But his office isn't doing labor trafficking, but does the FBI also work with labor trafficking survivors?
Yes, there's a whole another department that does that, and I have no doubt that.
So I think we have some people in line for, Deependra, please go ahead.
So everyone is talking about like human trafficking, international human trafficking. So at the same time, after the earthquake in Nepal, there was a huge increase of internal trafficking. So girls were after the earthquake, many people in Nepal, in the remote areas, they lost their home, everything was gone. And so many brokers, they brought girls from the remote areas to Kathmandu and metropolitan cities like Kathmandu and Pokhara. And so these girls are trafficked from village to the big cities, and they are like forced to dance and to work in the brothels and all these things. So no one is talking about that, and this is one of the serious issues. And as everyone is involved in bribe and corruption, you know. So even I tried once with a friend of mine that we will try to get the data and we will try to talk to people, but like all the owners of the discos and the clubs, they have connection with the political leaders, you know. And so it's very hard to go and just interview them and try to find out like how we can help them, you know. So, and at the same time, this Qatar problem, the kafala system and the problems going on in Qatar was exposed by the media, and I highly appreciate the media for exposing these things, you know. But what will happen after the FIFA is over, the FIFA in Qatar is over, and the media is gone? What will happen next? Who is going to...
so you mean the FIFA building the huge stadiums for the soccer games?
Yeah. So who is going to talk about the problems in Qatar when the World Cup is over? So, and I haven't got the answer of this question.
And I think you're right. I think there always was an assumption that you had to cross an international border. Trafficking is probably the worst named crime ever. You don't have to cross an international border. Trafficking can be across a room. You're absolutely right. I want to turn to questions. We have a few minutes left for questions. And our first question comes from Tina Front. Could you introduce yourself, Tina? Tina is one of the other leaders of the survivor movement in the United States. Tina?
Thank you. Hi, I'm way too short for that. Hi. I'm Tina Front. I'm the founder of Courtney's House. I'm also a survivor here in D.C. And so I'm also on the White House Council. I just wanted to say something for you first before my question. I'm on the White House Advisory Council, and I'm the co-chair of Rule of Law. One of the things that we're currently doing right now is actually redoing the federal training for FBI, Homeland Security, DOD, to include not just our story, but to include more investigative pieces, how to get a whole network for domestic trafficking, labor trafficking, sex trafficking as well, and we're redoing all of that to make it consistent. So that's something you might want to be aware of for that. My question to you, without of the Innocent Lost Initiative, how many of the minors do you know that were either put in juvenile detention for their safety because maybe they were waiting on a hold for intercompact to go into another state, or they had other charges like abscondence, which is running away? How many were held? How many were over the age of 18 but also held, even though they were definitely victims of trafficking, but they were held and charged? And how many were actually put on probation to make sure that they received services?
Well, I'll have to get back to you with the specifics on that, but I can tell you that it's not the FBI's intention to ever detain any minors of sex trafficking. That is not our practice. And if they are detained during the course of an operation, it would be based on a state warrant or state crime that our local partners are enforcing. But it is not the FBI, it is not federal law enforcement who's doing that.
Okay, thank you.
One of the greatest things I saw, actually, it was a federal prosecutor in Florida who was working with a victim witness who had outstanding warrants in New York. And the federal prosecutor in Florida called the Manhattan DA's office and said, please drop these, and they did. Right? So I think there needs to be a lot more, to Tina's point, there needs to be a lot more creativity in protecting trafficking victims from prosecution. You know, Jennifer, I wonder if you could very briefly address this question as well, because I know you're working with sex trafficking survivors, including youth in Ohio and around the country. And so are you seeing arrests as a problem for that community, and what happens to those minors?
It's ridiculous. I know the arrests are quite frustrating for the adults, because the adult victims that are prosecuted or ticketed for solicitation, their pictures are all over the newspapers, they're all over the media, but these buyers, the main problem, let's just put it out there. If there was nothing being demanded, there'd be nothing to supply. But the buyers, they get away with maybe a ticket or going to a day school in order to avoid that.
Have you seen any?
I have actually, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. I've actually worked with a minor who was being held and criminalized in a lockdown facility, an institution, and when her family called me in and I heard details, I was shocked, but it was the moment sitting in the courtroom with this minor and hearing a judge, a female judge, threaten this female minor victim whose traffickers were being looked into, and that's still an open investigation. I can't speak much on that, but they are trying to prosecute this minor's traffickers, which is a hard task in itself. I mean, society doesn't believe it's a problem, so why would they convict him of it? But anyways, so she's being held and locked up, and this judge looks at her and threatens her that if she doesn't learn how to comply more efficiently, that they will charge her with this felony as an adult that will make her register as a sex offender for the rest of her life, because she posted her own picture on Craigslist because it's all she knew. It's all she had been conditioned to know how to do in life and how to survive. This is a very real issue. There are minors more and more and more every day that are being criminalized instead of offered the restoration and help that they really need. But in all fairness, you know, sometimes that is the only safe place to stick them, because, you know, the places that work with minors or the places that directly service survivors escaping the life and trying to rebuild, we don't have the funding to have enough beds to take care of everybody. So again, I'll bring that up too. But yeah, it's a very real issue, and it needs to be stopped.
And you mentioned this issue of sort of restoring and restoration of minors. And one of the issues that we've identified with our research is that although restitution is mandatory under federal law for human trafficking survivors, where the trafficker is convicted or pleads guilty, the least likely people to receive criminal restitution in the United States are child victims of sex trafficking, which is pretty horrendous. So we have another question. Others, feel free to line up. Go ahead, please. And please introduce yourself.
My name is Kathy Martin. I came here from Virginia Beach, but I've been doing work with, human trafficking and all these different issues in Trinidad, in Boston, and a couple other places. And one of the things that always strikes me or has been in my mind very strongly most recently, and it might be to Kevin, Tina may have actually answered the question, is when you look at the drug trafficking trade, they were able to come together after a period of time, the different organizations, and create really strong laws that allowed, drugs trafficking over state lines, different things. They're now like consolidated, so there's a stronger sentence. The same thing with RICO, the same organization stuff. Even kidnapping in the States, if you cross state lines, there's a much bigger issue than if you have the child within state. So my question for Kevin, and maybe you know about it, different organizations, is there any current conversation, Tina may have answered, real conversation about what laws need to get put in place to make the trafficking that's happening domestically, so when a girl from New York is taken to Chicago and Philadelphia and all of these places, is there any real conversation, any real thing happening to put the rule of law behind those things going on right now?
Yeah, this past year, the FBI, led by the Department of Justice, was part of a human trafficking national strategy on behalf of the federal government, and we had representation from the FBI as well as the Justice Department and many participants to make recommendations, if need be, for changes to the law. A couple of months ago, the human trafficking strategy came out. It's available on the Justice Department's website, justice.gov/human trafficking. But I can say that with regard to sex trafficking of minors, which is my area, we have very good laws and very good sentences. And it's not uncommon for somebody who is investigated and prosecuted for sex trafficking of minors to get 20 plus years. I'm pleased that in the crimes against children world, the sentences and the mandatory minimum sentences are among the best there is. So we don't see a specific issue with not getting enough sentences or that the laws are not adequate when it comes to sex trafficking of minors.
And if I can just add some data to that answer, in 2015, the year for which we have the latest data for prosecutions in the United States, there were 257 prosecutions, according to the Department of Justice, reported by the Department of State. Of the 257 prosecutions, 9 were for labor trafficking, and the vast majority of the remaining 248 were for child sex trafficking. And so I think, by and large, what we're seeing in the United States is a lack of prosecution for forced labor and far less prosecution for trafficking of adults by force, fraud, or coercion. Okay? So let's go to this side. Please, go ahead. Hi, Kate.
Hi, Martina. Kate Chernush. I'm the founder and artistic director of Artworks for Freedom. We use the power of art to fight human trafficking and modern slavery. And I'm very struck by the subhead here of putting the rule of law behind human rights. But what I've discovered in my travels and working with NGOs all over the world is that oftentimes the laws are in place. They seem perfectly benign. So, for example, and I know this exists for in domestic servitude and especially with forced labor, that the laws are in place so the sending country has contracts that are approved by the government of that country. The receiving country has contracts that are approved by the government of that country, so that's all very legal and above board. But when it comes down to the moment where the victim is papers are confiscated and they're trapped in a system where they have no power, my question is, how do you address the issue of trying to get the spirit of the law behind human rights, that laws that are in place that really help powerless people, because at the end of the day, this is really about powerlessness. So my question really to all of you, but whoever would want to take
Deependra,
a stab.
do you want to start with that, please?
So thank you for the question, ma'am. So I agree with you that the agreement between two countries are signed, but for example, when a company in Qatar brings out the demand letter for workers, so in their demand they clearly say that the salary for labor, construction labor will be 600 plus 200, you know.
And what currency is this?
It's Qatari riyals, you know.
Okay.
So Nepal government has strictly said that the labor, construction labor, the salary of the construction labor must be minimum 800 Qatari riyal, and 300 will be like food or other things, you know. So the Qatari government, companies in Qatar, they just have the agreement, the demand says that it's 600 plus 200. When it is gone to sign, approval, when they take that contract to sign by the embassy of Nepal in Qatar, they just amend that. So they make it 900 plus 300. When it comes to Nepal, again it's the fake one to be signed by the Ministry of Labor. It also says that 900 plus 300. When and the people who wants to apply for the job, they are also made the false or fake promises that it's 900 plus 300. Everything is done. Their visa is issued. Everything is issued before flying to the Gulf country. So if their flight is today evening, so today in the morning they are informed that your salary is 800 plus 200. So in this 600 plus 200, in this situation, what the candidate, what he's going to do?
So the whole thing is based on fraud.
Yeah. So everything is paid. The person has paid for the ticket, for the visa, for everything. He has gone for the training. He has paid a huge amount of money by taking loan against the collateral and anything, everything. So after everything is done, at the end they inform that this is the reality. You are going to get 600 plus 200. Now, whom you are going to blame? This guy doesn't know whom to talk with, where to go and seek help, where to go and find the justice.
But you helped workers when you were in Qatar. People came to you and you helped them. So
so far we helped two people. So they were like the brokers. They just made they said that you are going to work as a storekeeper, and they were happy and they went to Qatar, but they were not working in the storekeeper. They were sent to the desert to take care of the camels and the goats. And later when by chance he was able to talk to his parents in Nepal, and so they approached me, and then I talked to one of my brother in Qatar, and so I told him that go and talk to the manager of the company, HR manager, and he was lucky to convince him. And so later on, like, it was very hard after for 5-6 months. After 5-6 months, these two guys, they were brought back to work as a for the job, the storekeeper.
So interventions can be made, but they are very labor intensive. We have just a little bit of time left, and I want to give the last word to each one of you very briefly. Andrea, I'm so sorry we're not going to get to your question. I apologize. Okay, thanks. Sorry. I want to get to your to sort of anything else that you think that we should know, anything else that you'd like to convey to this audience, Evelyn, of experts and people who care deeply about trafficking but feel very frustrated about our ability to do, as Kay said, to bring the rule of law to fight this problem. So what would you close with, Evelyn?
For me, it would be 3 things. First is, let's stop separating sex and labor, because most of the time people are only focusing on the sex trafficking and forgetting the labor trafficking. And 2, even though we do have awareness, we've come a long way, but there's still work to be done. This movement is still behind in a lot of stuff. Like Jennifer said earlier, as we're sitting here, somebody is being a victim. And when we talk about refugees, you also have to think about them possibly end up being a victim of trafficking. So we have to do more awareness, and that will be through education and providing jobs. And third, please, let's find long-term solutions for survivors that have been out and want opportunities.
So Deependra, one sentence. What's the last thing you want to leave with this? What's the last thing you want to leave with this audience?
In Nepal, what we are trying to do is to stop human trafficking or modern day slavery. We want to set up a research center, as apart from my NGO, I have been working for Andrew Gardner. He's an anthropologist from University of Puget Sound. He always tries to help me, and he cares me a lot, like you all. So we want to have a research center where we can be like a platform for the international researchers, professors or writers or journalists who wants to come and do any kind of research in Nepal, and that will be a great way to produce job for the people.
So I can attest that Deependra is a great researcher. So if you're looking for research in Nepal, he's your man. So Jennifer, I want to give you the last word. What's the one thing that you'd like to leave with this audience?
Well, seeing as this audience is, it mostly consists of people who are already active in the fight against trafficking, my best thing for you would be, this job is not easy. It's not for the faint at heart. We see a lot of heartbreak. We see a lot of struggle. We see a lot of frustration in our lives daily in everyday situations. But we've been called to be a light in the darkness, and we know that the world of human trafficking is about as dark as it can get in some phases, and it's for that one. We may work tirelessly day in, day out. We may live in frustration. We may live in heartbreak, but there's that one person who will get a hand up and be able to reach their hand out. And so I just want you to keep the hope that what you're doing is having an impact, and let's keep doing it. We have to keep pressing forward. We have to keep our head high, and we have to walk through this together. And you need to put your survivor leaders in the front of that.
So I want to thank all of you. Thank you. So we are the last thing between you